Welcome, everyone. We're going to call this meeting to order. It's 6:06 p.m. The Finance Committee meeting first, and then we'll move to working board meeting. Here. Here.
And Chels.
Lindsay's here.
Oh, Lindsay's here, sorry.
Here. Here. So our first, we have 3 action items. The first is the minutes. Actually, I don't know. Oh, sorry. Never mind. Are we? Okay. So I will read the motion for minutes, acceptance of minutes. The Finance Committee recommends that the minutes of the September 17th, 2018 Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented or as amended. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Tanya Woody?
Yes.
Cohen? Yes. Chels?
Yes. Motion carries. Our next action item is related to our audit, and I will read the motion, and then are we going to have a discussion now?
Yeah,
Presentation by our guest here. So I'll first read the motion. We can have a second, and then we'll have discussion.
Right.
The Finance Committee recommends that the fiscal year 17 audit be presented to the full board for approval. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. So, hello, sir.
Good evening. My name is John George. I'm an audit partner with RSM. I'm here tonight to present the results of the audit. So we have, in your packets, you have a draft of the financial statements for both is there a clicker?
Yes.
Oh, great. Sorry about that. I do have a back issue right now, so I'm going to try and do this without wincing here too much. But
Would it be more comfortable if you want to prefer it?
I probably can't stand right now. It'll take me a couple minutes to adjust. It just kind of shifted when I sat down, so we'll be fine.
John, would you be so kind as to move the microphone straight underneath you and
There you go. Is that better?
let the world know that you're here?
There you go. Okay, so as I said, I'm the audit partner with RSM. We're presenting the results of the audit. So in your packet, you should have the draft financial statements for Evanston 65, as well as a draft of the joint agreement. What I'm going to do is go through our engagement team, the audit process, go over some of the financial highlights, and then the other deliverables, the single audit report and the report on Evanston Park joint agreement. So on the engagement team side, consistent engagement team from prior year. Myself, Eman, and Chelsea were the primary team members. From an efficiency standpoint, consistency in a team helps with efficiency, helps with better understanding of the organization, allows us to dig in a little bit deeper into specific areas, and hopefully allows for management a little bit of ease with management and in the process as well. Audit process, there's 3 phases to the audit: planning, preliminary field work, and final field work. So planning started in June and July, both internally as a team. We review what areas we're going to focus on. We do a risk-based audit, so we want to make sure that we identify what areas we're going to have the most significant areas of risk and target those areas. So we do have internal meetings established that. We also have meetings with management to make sure we set up a formal timeline, expectations are set on who's going to provide what and when, and then timelines for deliverables. Our preliminary field work was the week of July 9th. Preliminary field work, get an understanding of the internal controls of the organization, updates on board minutes, what's been happening. Again, revising our plan as needed based on what's happening at the district. We do focus on specific areas of controls, the primary areas of controls, receipts, disbursements, and payroll. We perform Tesla controls around those transaction cycles to make sure that they're operating as management has described to us. And if there's any issues, we'll report those as areas for improvement or control deficiencies. We didn't have any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. There were a couple areas of suggested improvements, control areas that we discussed with management and communicated that during the audit process. Final field work was a 3-week period in end of August, beginning of September. I'm sorry, I forgot to keep that moving, sorry. Final field works where we perform our substantive tests. We obtain from management the trial balance and financial information as of June 30. We're digging into details around those significant account balances and areas, significant transaction cycles to make sure that the information that's being presented is accurate. We do tests of that information. We don't audit 100% of the information, 100% of the transactions, but we do sample those and ensure that the information that's being presented is materially correct. After final field work, we draft reports with management, allow them to review and give us feedback and changes to the statements, and brings us to the board meeting here today on the 5th. And we'll issue final documents upon the approval of after tonight's meeting. Just want to highlight now a couple financial report highlights. The main thing in the entire financial statement that is the auditor's opinion. Make sure that's up there. We did issue an unmodified opinion. That's the highest level of opinion we can provide. An unmodified opinion means we did not have any modifications to the information that was presented in the financial statements. So it's a clean opinion. Management's discussion and analysis on pages 3 through 12 is a nice synopsis of what transpired through the year. So we're talking, the financial statements themselves are, an 80-page document. Management discussion and analysis is a nice synopsis of what transpired through the year. So I'd like to point that out to make sure you understand that that's a nice area to look at. It explains balance fluctuations from last year to this year, operating fluctuations as well. So a good synopsis. The government-wide financial statements are on pages 13 through 14. The government-wide financial statements pull all the fund information together. Your ed, O&M, all your individual fund statements are pulled together into one column. And in addition to that, your debt and longer-term assets and liabilities are pulled into that statement. So capital assets and your bond debt is pulled into that. Then the fund financial statements are on pages 15 through 18, and those are the individual, that's the information you're typically used to seeing on a monthly basis by fund. We have reconciliations between those two statements as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The government-wide financial statements, just a couple highlights here. Overall, the net position of the district, in the middle line there for 2018 was $61.5 million. Total liabilities were $78.2 million, and our statement of activities change this year, the change in net position was $20.2 million. So significant increase there. The change in net position really was a result of the referendum revenues that came through. And obviously those will be used towards future operations. Okay, fund financial statements. And if there's any questions as I'm going through, please hop in. The fund financial statements are on pages 15 through 18. As I mentioned before, the fund financials do not include capital assets. They're more short-term focus. The government-wide financials do pull all those funds together and include capital assets. Governmental funds, the fund balances were $47.9 million for the end of 2018. Considerable increase again there. The change in fund balance is $19.7 million, and that's what's taken us from the $28 million to the $47 million this year. Again, referendum revenues are the primary driver there. The main difference between the fund balance and the fund financial statements and the government-wide financial statements is, as I mentioned before, debt service that's pulled out of the fund financial statements and depreciation and capital assets that are added on the government-wide financial statements. So those two differences are what drive that change from the fund financials to the government-wides. Overall operating results for the district, general fund had a net increase in its fund balance of $19.8 million. Debt service fund had an increase in fund balance of $493,000. So again, those primary drivers, the referendum is fit. This is a comparison we've done in the past of your operating funds. So this pulls in the general fund, and in the financial statement, general fund is comprised of the ed, tort, special ed, O&M, and working cash. For the operating funds, we take the general fund along with transportation and IMRF, and we're just comparing budget to actual here. You can see that overall, in line on our revenues, with the expectation, of course, that the referendum revenues would be driving that increase. We had expenditures under budget, about $3 million, and that, along with the anticipated excess of revenues over expenditures, drove that $19.8 million surplus this year. So those are the financial statements. On the, in addition to the financial statement audit, we perform a single audit. A single audit is where we test your expenditures of federal awards. So the district receives quite a bit of federal dollars, and the expenditures associated with that have to be tested, and we issue a compliance opinion related to that. Our standards require that we test certain programs to achieve a certain coverage. We have to test at least 40% of those federal expenditures this year, and we alternate those programs based on their spending thresholds. So this year we tested two major programs, Title I and Head Start. Last year we tested Special Ed and Head Start. In that testing, we test specific transactions for each program. We test compliance with the program requirements, and we did not have any issues of material weakness or significant deficiencies with internal controls around those, or within compliance and controls around compliance. So clean opinions both on the financial statement side and on the single audit side. Park School, similar, same team, timeline, field work dates. Our audit opinion for Park School was also unmodified, so a clean opinion. Those financial statements are on a full accrual basis, and that financial position, if you look at it, shows that there is no fund balance there. The components of those two are the elementary school and the high school. So any balance, whether it's a surplus or a deficit, is really allocated to those two, between those two entities. So there's a net zero net position. Again, in our testing, no findings on internal control issues, and those Park School reports will be filed at the same time Evanston's reports are filed. So overall, clean opinion, clean process, no issues. There are some additional schedules that were included in the report this year related to THIS and the other post-employment benefit obligation. The district's on a cash basis of reporting, modified cash basis of reporting. So while we include those schedules in the report of the liability that's out there for that post-employment benefit, it's not recorded on the financial statements because of the basis of accounting, but they're included as a supplemental schedule. We did have some issues with the reporting at the state level, not within the district, on that THIS reporting, and the state is revising some of those numbers, but it's a significant liability that impacts all districts. I just wanted to point out that that is a supplemental schedule that was added this year, and the state is working to revamp some of the reporting that they've done on that schedule.
John, if I can jump in, what THIS is a teacher's health insurance system. It's a supplementary health insurance system for folks who retire from here, licensed employees.
Correct. Questions for me?
Questions of the audit?
I have a question. John, just thinking about the year ahead or the years ahead, are there things on the horizon financially or from a tax perspective or that we should be paying attention to?
Well, there's new accounting standards that are coming out every year. This one that came out this year was GASB 75, and that's that THIS, right. Teachers' health insurance obligation, post-employment obligation, so the district offers up for their retirees, the ability to pay in and receive health insurance through that program. And there's a liability that's associated with that, an actuarial calculation. So that was the new one this year. Significant pronouncements that are coming through would be GASB 87, which impacts leases. So leases, similarly to financial accounting standards, governmental accounting standards, are picking up leases on the balance sheet. So where operating leases were a disclosure and just flowing through the income statement as lease payments, now we're going to be seeing the assets, the right to use that equipment coming on the balance sheet and then an obligation. So that's a significant change. It's really just the pronouncements that are coming through that you need to be aware of.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Well, thank you to your team and to our team,
Yeah.
especially for such a clean audit. And if there are no questions, then we'll go ahead and take a vote on moving the audit to the full board for its approval at the next board meeting.
Yes. Fine. Yes. Chad?
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Hope you feel better. Our next action item relates to the Truth in Taxation Resolution, or tax levy. Just something, again, that we do every year about this time.
Yes.
I'll read the motion, and then we can second it and have any discussion, Raphael, that you want. So the Finance Committee recommends that the tax levy resolution be presented to the full board for approval. Second from Ms. Cohen. Oh, sorry, it's too fast. Here comes the deal. So Lindsay made a second, or seconded. So we just need. Oh, so now we'll have a presentation, sorry.
So one of the most important things that the Board of Education does is the approval of the levy, which, as the chairwoman mentioned, we do once a year. And the process that we go through in the adoption of the levy cycle is listed there. This is the first step. And then the second step will be the approval to do the Truth in Taxation, which will happen next Monday. And then we'll do a publication in the newspaper on December 6th. And then we'll have a public hearing. Even though it's not required, we're not levying over 5%. But customarily in the district, we do that just as part of open government. And then by the last Tuesday in December, we have to file this with the Cook County Clerk, or we will not get our money. So I just want an opportunity to point out the importance of the property tax, which is the whole levy process. It makes up close to 80% of the revenue that we use to fund the district. So it's the single largest source of money for us to run the school district. So I cannot overstate the importance of it. Thank you. There's some general terminology that I think is important for us to just understand so we know we are talking about the same thing. A levy, what it essentially means is a request for money. This is the amount of money that we request from the taxpayer in the community in order for us to be able to fund our budget. And an extension is the bill that is actually sent out by the county clerk that goes out to taxpayers, and that determines the amount that we get. So just to point out, the levy is actually not the actual amount that we'll get. It's what we request. The actual amount that we'll get is what is extended later on in the spring. And another important component of getting the property tax levy is CPI. That's why we include that information in the finance package every month. CPI is a consumer price index, and it's CPI for the major metropolitan area in the country. And what it does, it drives the inflationary indicators, if you will, of what things cost. And that's what determines how much we can raise, we can request, really. And for 2018, the CPI factor that we're using for this levy is 2.1%, which is the same thing, interestingly enough, that we use for 2017. And EAV is an equalized assessment value. What that is the value that has been set on taxable property in the district. And a big part of that is what they call a factor that is actually generated by the Illinois Department of Revenue. So EAV is the value of the property in the district that will be taxed in order for us to get a levy. So the final amount, as I indicated earlier, will be determined by the county clerk. We do this early, but the final EAV, for example, would not be known till April. And that's the goofy thing about the levy process. We try to estimate to the best we can how much we think the property values are, but the final determination after appeals have been taken into consideration will not happen until April. So we have to do the best we can to make sure that we don't leave any money on the table. And a big part of what governs how much we get is PTEL. That was a law that was passed in 1995 that essentially say we are limited to CPI or 5%, the lesser of them. So as I mentioned earlier before, 2.1 is what we're working with. And we will not get any more than 2.1, even though we balloon that. So once the levy is adopted by the board, it has to be filed with the clerk. So the interesting thing about the whole levy and property tax process is that in a fiscal year, we actually get revenue from the levy. It crosses 2 fiscal years. So the money that we're going to get from this levy, the first installment is actually going to come in March, April of next year. That will be in FY19. The second installment we wouldn't get till August, September of next year, which will be fiscal year 20. So I always point that out, and a lot of times people get confused about it, but I think it's important to know it crosses 2 fiscal years. We don't get it all in 1 fiscal year. So this is the makeup of the funds that we're going to get. These are all the different funds that operational funds, I should point out. The education fund is the largest one. It's the one that we use for most of the expenditure that the district incurs. And it also has the most flexibility. We can pretty much do most things out of the education fund. So that's why a lot of time we put the most of the request in the ed fund. O&M is what is used for building maintenance and upkeep. Transportation is to get our kids back and forth from school. Special education, as it says, funds our children who have IEP and require special education. Tort fund is a fund that is set up to protect the district against exposures to litigations and lawsuits. And IMRF is the source of funding for pension of our employees who are not licensed. So anyone who's not a teacher or an administrator who doesn't have a license from the State Board of Education, the cost of providing our contribution to their pension comes out of that IMRF. And Social Security is the cost of FICA, which every employee pays. We levy that for that. And life safety is for any work that is approved by the State Board of Education for life safety code upkeep in the district. So for the 2018 levy, we are requesting $110,548 million, but we will not get this amount because what is going to happen is there are caps that the county clerk is going to apply based on the rates, based on the EAV, the final numbers. But what we try to do is we try to request as much as we can based on the information that we have. The interesting thing is, if we make a mistake and we don't request enough money, we lose the ability to get that money forever. So we have to be very careful in being aggressive to request as much as possible. And that's where the term that I will use down the road comes into play, is balloon levy.
Raphael, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
The life safety line looks much smaller than the other lines, and it is much smaller than the other lines.
Right.
Would you be so kind as to explain that?
The reason is that life safety has got a lot of restrictions. That's really what it boils down to. So that's why we only levy $100,000 for. There are a lot of restrictions that the State Board of Education puts in place, that the Regional Office of Education puts in place, as far as how we can use that. Since we want as much flexibility as far as upgrading our buildings and doing the work that we need to do, we tend to levy for an O&M. It gives us more flexibility. Please stop me and ask a question as I'm going along.
Can I jump in then? So this is essentially projected, what we're hoping to get based off of that 4.94%. But we're not anticipating, is that correct?
Yes.
But we're not anticipating that because we're anticipating because of CPI being 2.1% and new construction won't equal that 4.94%. So this is idealized, but not probably going to happen.
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm getting there.
The goofy thing is the way the levy works is we're required to provide all the information by December. But a big variable in determining how much we actually get is not going to be known till the spring.
Because that fourth quarter is what we're waiting for, that fourth quarter.
No, what it is really the appeals going on
Sure.
with properties now.
Gotcha.
The EAV is a big factor that drives what we get.
Okay.
Those numbers are not going to be finalized till April.
Okay.
So we've been asked to put in a request for levy, even though the final number that is going to firm things up will not be available till April.
Okay.
So to kind of address that, on Friday, I was at EdRed meeting, and one of the folks who actually presented to us is Fritz Cahey, who's running for assessor. And that's one of the questions that we ask him. If he gets into office, can he come up with a way where we actually have the information we need earlier? Sure. If we can get that information in November, October, instead of trying to project in the dark, essentially, what we hope to get, and put that in December, even though we would not have the final numbers till April. Sure. And he promised to look into that, and he said he understands the importance of doing that. So that's always been one of the weak points of doing levy requests in the state of Illinois.
Do we know what the levy request was, or not the request was? Do we know what the actual, I forget what the term was, for last year?
The extension?
Yes, extension, thank you.
It's coming.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
Sorry.
okay.
But one more piece, which Raphael already said, we want to be in a position where we can levy at the highest level, while still being respectful of these are public dollars.
Right.
And if we under levy,
Right.
then we can never recover those resources.
And it's compounded every year, so obviously
Correct.
that's money
Right.
that's exponentially lost in the
Yes.
future.
And there were years past where the system under levied, and
Right.
so those dollars never came back.
Right, and like it's a sign of goodwill, but then that hurts you in the long run when costs of expenses go up, of course.
So this is the debt service levy. What that is also referred to as bond and interest. All the bonds that we issue over the years, we have to pay them back. So we actually don't have to worry about doing this levy. When we issue those bonds, the bond, part of the bonding process, we file the underwriter as well as the investment banking firm. They file the information with the county clerk that shows how much we owe and the payment schedule for that. So the county clerks automatically include that in the levy for us so we can pay our bondholders. So this is the amount that we will have to pay back in this levy year for the outstanding debt service, bond and interest that the district issued. So for levy year 2018, it's going to be $6.5 million. And there's also a provision in law whereby if we don't get all the money that we levy, which sometimes we don't because folks, not everybody pays their taxes, there's a provision to make up the difference so that we're not in default to the bondholders.
Raphael, since we have not issued bonds because of our capacity issues in the last several years, will this number be trending down in the future? Because we were at capacity and couldn't issue additional bonds?
It will, but it's going to be a while. As I speak to you right now, we have an outstanding bond owed of $78 million. And some of those bonds, actually, they were issued, I think the newest one was issued back in 2011. And those are not due to be paid till 2020. So it will go down, but not that quickly.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to answer your question. This is the extension. I wanted to see what the levy is and what the actual extension is. So if you look at the levy year, last year, remember I mentioned earlier that we had the same CPI, which is 2.10. We had a levy, but this was actually what was extended by the county clerk. What was extended was $105 million for operational taxes, and the rest was bond and interest. Okay, so compared to last year, we're looking at an increase of we're hoping to get an increase of $5 million. Okay, and then on the right there is the operational levy plus bond and interest, which shows a percentage change of 5.1%. Before bond and interest, we're below 5%, it's 4.94, which is why I mentioned earlier that we really don't have to do the truth in taxation because the amount requested is less than 5%. But we do it as a way just to be open about governance. So I wanted us to be able to see the difference by fund of what we levy going back to 2016 and what we are levying now. Part of what is driving, if you see the changes, part of what is driving is what we actually require in the budget. If you look at it last year, we only requested, in O&M, for example, we only requested 5.3 million is what was extended. But if you look at what we're requesting this year in the 2018 levy, we're requesting $9 million because we recognize we need to spend more money on our buildings. So we adjust that based on the need that we have by fund. Any questions? Go ahead.
What's the justification for the decrease in transportation?
Part of what we have to be aware of is balance, the balance by fund. We can levy as much as we need, but what we don't want to do, we don't want to levy and warehouse money in certain funds. Because by law, you're not supposed to have more than 2.5 times of what you need to operate in previous years in a particular fund. So we always are conscious of that. So if we have enough money in a particular fund, we then don't levy as much in that fund. We levy in the fund where we require more money.
I see. So is that associated with the fact that our transportation costs were lower in the past?
No, not last year, it wasn't. What it was, we have more money in the transportation funds. So we don't require as much to levy in 18. We require more money, for example, in O&M, operation and maintenance, and education that we do in transportation. So our budget really drives the request to levy.
As well as what the previous fund balance was in that particular fund. So there was a higher, I think we say it's the higher balance.
And we can't exceed the 2.5 times
Right.
from the previous.
Because by law, a taxpayer can actually file an objection if we have more than that. That taxpayer can then say, you are levying on a fund that doesn't require it because you have more than 2.5. And they can file an objection with the courts, and if the court determines that the taxpayer is right, we'll be asked to refund that money. So we have to be careful.
More than 2.5 of the, in 2017, the extension was 4.4 million?
So what you have to do is you have to look at your last couple of years, how much you spending, and you have to look at how much you have in that fund balance at the end of the year. It cannot be more than 2.5 times the amount you have in the fund
What's
balance.
left over?
Yes.
The fund balance is actually way below our annual budget for that fund, but we just have needs in other funds like special education, O&M, Raphael mentioned. So
Education,
we know
yeah.
we have a defined amount, and we just need to reallocate to different funds.
I see.
So,
Thank you.
do we talk about the reduction in education, the education levy? Did we talk about that? Sorry, I forget.
Yeah, what it is a lot of time when you're doing a balloon levy, when you're looking for, so there are caps in each fund.
Sure.
There's a maximum amount that you can levy by funds, right? But the education fund also has the most room for you. So when you're looking at levying and you can't put the money somewhere else, you put it in education. Now, if you look at what we did last year compared to what we did this year, we requested more money in O&M. In order for us to get that more money in O&M, we have to reduce the amount of money that we requested for education, because there's a cap by fund, how much we can request. So it's kind of like, you have to balance what you request by fund.
Sure.
Does that answer your question?
Kind of. So and did we talk about why there's such a large increase in the tort fund?
Right. So one of the biggest reasons is negotiation. Tort fund pays for legal obligation that the district has. For example, last year when we did the levy, there was no collective bargaining negotiation. Right. So we knew we weren't going to spend that much money on legal fees. So we levied accordingly. But in 2018, we know we go into negotiation
With two unions.
with two unions. And right after that, I think there's another union that comes up. So we have to take all of those into consideration in making a levy request.
Okay. So sometimes, like I think I'm hearing what I'm looking at is that sometimes if there's changes to different funds, then since you have that 110, which is your max amount, which is that 4.94 is your total. So it looks like sometimes like some areas are lowered to balance out increases in another area. So we're just kind of like.
Apart from the total too, you're right on. Even by fund, there are actually rates that you have to be careful of.
Okay.
You can't levy more than a particular rate per fund too.
Okay.
So you have to be mindful of doing that. If you go beyond that, then you're gonna have a problem with the county clerk. You can't do that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
So it's total in aggregate and also by funds.
Okay. Gotcha.
So this is what we just talked about, the increase over last year, what it represents. It represents just below 5%. And we mentioned this earlier, that this is not the amount of money that we will receive. What it is just an attempt to capture as much of the funds available that we're entitled to as possible. Because once we don't do that, we lose that money for good. And one of the reasons why we also do that is, it's hard to know what new construction is. And that was something else that we talked to the incoming assessor, if he wins the election, which is that, can he give us better numbers when it comes to new construction, which currently is a shot in the dark. What you do, you reach out to the City of Evanston, Department of Economic Development, to ask them, is there anything coming up in the way of huge development that will impact our levy? And then you do some analysis and to try to get that number right. But we are hoping that the assessor, since that's his main responsibility, will be able to give us better numbers than that. So that's one of the reasons why we belong. So those are the unknowns as we go in.
Do we know, are you gonna discuss later what new construction's been in the past and like what we can anticipate?
That's part of what we do. We do an analysis and go back 8-10 years to see what new construction is. But what you also have to think about, part of a big chunk of that was that there was a recession.
Right.
So there were no new construction in a certain part of the year. So it's a science, but it's also an art.
Right.
So, yeah. So it's tricky. If we just rely on the data too much, if you think about from 07, 08, 09, 10, there was no money, there was no financing to do new construction. So if you use that, you over-rely on a low number, so.
I'm sorry to be taking up time with so many
Please,
questions.
please.
Oh, that's
I
okay.
just wanna wrap
That's
my
why we're
head
here.
around seeing.
That's okay.
Absolutely.
You're
helping
asking,
me
it doesn't
understand as
mean you're
well.
the
It's a
only
good
one that
question.
needs it answered.
Sure.
Some of us are silent. Rafael, could you just restate that the ultimate, when we do the extension, it will be based on the EAV plus the CPI plus new construction?
Right.
The end answer.
Right.
This is what we request, but ultimately that will, so.
When we do the levy, we don't do the extension. The
I'm sorry, when we
counterpart
do the
does
levy,
extension.
sorry, yes.
When we do the levy. Levy is a request, the extension is the bill that goes out.
And again, we can't predict what it will be, but this is ballooned higher, and it will be adjusted lower
Yes.
once they figure all that out.
But we can't afford to take a chance of not ballooning it.
Great, thank you.
So since the EAV is so important to the calculation of levy, I wanted us to see what our EAV was in 2016. It was 2.9 billion with a B. And in 2017, it went up to, and I think it went up to 3 billion. And so the difference between 2017 and 2018 is 2.45%. That's a big chunk of how we get the money that we get in our property tax receipt, the equalized assessment value of properties. Any questions?
From 2016 to 2017.
Yes. And we wouldn't know what 2018 is until April. So one thing I also want to touch on is TIF. And that's what it is. It's something that came into vogue in the late 70s, early 80s. It's an attempt by municipalities to try to juice economic development. That's what it is in theory. An area is identified as a TIF area for 23 years. During that period, all the taxes are frozen. So the frozen taxes is what we can levy. So any other growth for the next 23 years goes to the TIF district. So the thinking is that that money is then used to create development in the identified area. We've had a few of them. The last one to be terminated is the one Washington National TIF, which is where Whole Foods and a few of the stores were located in downtown Evanston. And during that time, we didn't get any money from there. So 23 years, we didn't get any money. So that, from my point of view, would actually impact us negatively if you think about how much money we could have gotten from that. But thank God it's been terminated in December, and we can actually start getting some money from those properties, especially the appreciation of them. Any questions? That's it.
So, question around, so the Northwestern, right, that's a question that pops up that I've heard. I know, don't they contribute something to the city in regards to, in lieu of not paying taxes, because we see nothing of that, right? Or is that?
They do on occasion, and they've been generous when they do that on occasion, but there's no regular payment in lieu of taxes. Now, the Northwestern President Shapiro has worked with Mayor Tisdale and now Mayor Haggerty on payments to the city for some improvements and investments, and so that's also very generous. But the payment in lieu of taxes, at least that we've seen, it's not guaranteed and it's not regular, but we have received some resources over time.
And also, the annual TIF incremental payment is also from the city are you meaning the one that comes from the city to us?
No, I'm talking just about Northwestern.
Okay, so there also is, again, it's not contractual.
Right.
But because the TIF funds do accrue monies during those TIF years, if there's more money accruing than they expect, then we've, in the past, annually got on the order of $300,000.
They have a target amount, and if that target amount is exceeded, they declare surplus. And they distribute proportionately to the taxing body
bodies, right.
in the city.
Thanks.
So in that case, do we have a projection of what will come from the expiration of the Washington National?
Yes. Initially, we projected $57.4 million
Total,
total.
Right.
Total. For Washington, yeah.
That would then be distributed.
proportion, right.
No. That's the value, the EAV of the TIF area after 23 years that the TIF is terminated. But once we receive the termination confirmation from the city of Evanston, the actual amount is $64.4 million.
So that goes back on the tax rolls, correct? That EAV goes back on the tax roll.
It will be considered part of new construction.
Right.
So
So
meaning that it won't be subject to the cap. You will not be subject, correct, right?
This year.
Oh, just for the 1 year.
This year, it's a
After
one-time,
that,
this
it
year.
will be okay.
It becomes regular property after this year.
Okay.
The first year a new construction gets on the tax roll is now subject to the cap, but then subsequent years.
do we have an estimate of what we believe we will accrue in revenue based on that? New
Yes,
And
What would that projected estimate?
what is that?
it's 2.38 million.
And one of the conversations that Raphael and I have had is when we look at our capital needs in the district, which are exceed $105 million of high priority, and we are right now using $1 million from referendum funds, the funds that the auditor was talking about for capital needs. This is an important time to think about using those resources for roofs, tuck pointing, and the major regular maintenance that we're not able to do over time, as well as some of the projects perhaps on that $105 million list.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Raphael. Yeah.
Another thank you to Raphael and Kathy for explaining this stuff. It's mind-boggling. And the mind-boggling thing is you have to do something now, but really you have to do something later, but you really have to have the art of doing this now because you could get bumped later. And so I thank you for being so articulate on that.
Thank you very much. All right, so now we'll vote.
Yes.
Cohen,
Yes.
Chow,
Yes. Motion carries. So we will move that to the full board for approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I think that is the last item of business on our agenda for the finance portion of this meeting. Our next meeting is December 3rd. And therefore, with no further business, the Finance Committee will adjourn at 6:55 p.m.
and with that, if we can switch over to the working board meeting, if we could please get a roll call. Chow.
Here.
Anuruti.
Here.
Cohen. Here. Mendoza.
Here.
Hernandez.
Here.
Carta. Here. Do we have any? I think we can probably get started. We have two discussion items to discuss. The first is summer learning projects.
So any
okay.
public comments? Yeah, okay.
Right, so yes, do you want to start, or Stacy?
Or if I can just do a broad-based kickoff. The the conversations we're going to have tonight, one is on summer learning and one is for algebra for all, our update, and sort of a snapshot view of where we are. And in many ways, this is the equity work of the district in real time, where rubber hits the road. We will be talking and indeed focusing on our priorities, how we're prioritizing budget, how we're thinking about our children with greatest needs, and how we're actually addressing that through the work that we do in our summer work and the work that we do on our algebra and mathematics programming. And so we'll look forward to Dr. Pitts, Jamila Pitts, who's here to give us an overview and propose next steps for our summer work, and then we'll move forward after that to talk about algebra for all.
Good evening. I always get ready to say good morning because I'm such in a habit, but good evening. I am Jamila Pitts, and I'm glad to be here with you this evening. One of my responsibilities is Summer Learning Coordinator, and I've actually been doing this job for about 10 years, and I was looking at a handbook that I had created after the first summer, noticing how much has changed since then. But one of the things that has not changed is the amount of collaboration that it takes to mount summer learning. So we talk about the invisible but vital team members. So I do want to call their names. I want to talk about the RAD department, nutrition services, health services, business and the payroll office, human resources, buildings and grounds, transportation, and the technology team. All of these individuals are really in the process of closing down one school year and simultaneously opening not really just summer, but also the coming school year as well. So I think they get one shout out. I want to talk about the collaboration that's needed between the special services team, early childhood center, school-age child care, the bilingual department, the curriculum and instruction team, and of course our 17 sites, who are all working to identify children and make sure that we're designing a program that's going to support them over the summer. And of course I want to talk about our community partners who come with an equity lens as well, wanting to meet the needs of our students. And finally, of course, I want to talk about the dedicated staff members who choose to serve in our summer learning programs. It is a choice, it is not a requirement, and of course it could not happen without all of those wonderful people who are committing to that process. So with that said, I do want to get us into the report. I hope that you've had a chance to look at it. We'll talk about a few of the details in the report. We're going to talk about what the programs are, who's being served, what we believe the impact of those programs are, and the next steps. So as Dr. Gorin mentioned, summer learning is really about equity. It's about making sure that we're meeting the needs of students who have shown some kind of need throughout the year to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them. So as we look over on our page, we know that we have 4 major programs that we call our on-site academic programs. Of course, we provide the extended school year programming, which is a legal requirement, but we don't do it because it's a legal requirement. We do it because we know we should. We have our pre-K Jumpstart program to make sure that our kids are having a great transition into the kindergarten years. We have our newcomers program, which supports students who are new to the country under 24 months. And of course, the newest, I think, addition is our middle school pre-algebra program. So those are the programs that we sponsor that are on-site academic programs. In addition to that, our biggest partner program, so this is probably the biggest change from 10 years ago. We used to try to provide all of the academic programming in on-site programs. And one year we took a turn and we decided we wanted to do something that provided a little bit more enrichment. And we really found that we didn't have the capacity to do all of that because it takes so much to have a really a strong program. So one of the greatest opportunities that came across was our partnership with the YMCA. So they started a program called Y Readers, and we hooked up with them in 2013. And over time, we've brought in the Y Readers and the Y Power Scholars. And what is great about this combination is we have academics in the morning. It's a half-day academic program, which is what we would have normally provided. which is staffed with District 65 teachers. And in the afternoon, the children stay on site and they receive enrichment programming from YWCA staff. So for the families, it's a one-stop experience. And for the children, they get that same high-quality academics. They get this enrichment that's connected to their academics. And because it's a full-day program, it's really a wonderful situation for the families that are able to take part in that. And this year, I'm happy to say, when you look in the recommendations, that we're going to be expanding that a little bit. So because we have only limited seats, we do try to provide other types of enrichment for students. So we have at the kindergarten level our, what we call this year, our home literacy program, which is really modeled or inspired by the work of Foundation 65. They, many years ago, I think 2011, started with a very in-depth home program. So we have our home literacy program, so we've had some students in the kindergarten who are rising first graders who received literature and communications from teachers over the summer to make sure that their families are staying in the habit of having rich literature experiences. There is a separate report on the Foundation 65 program, which always delivers great results for us. That's in your packet. And then we have our summer library learning program, where we're really excited about making sure that our families are connecting with the Evanston Public Library. And we've had a really some positive response for families who are saying, oh, I didn't know that the library did all this. So we're really excited to make sure that those families are making the library a destination location for summer activities. And of course, we mentioned here our Metamedia program, which is a few years old, also sponsored by the YMCA, and that targets some of our middle school students. So I didn't mention about our priorities where we really deal with the programming that we do is for younger students, but this is one of the ways that we really get to our middle school students in addition to our pre-algebra program. In addition to that, we didn't put a lot of details in there, but we did support this year the Freedom School. We did support Family Focus, which also includes District 65 staff, and we have supported the Fleetwood Jourdain Center. They have an academic portion of their day. So a few years ago, we created a partnership where we send certified staff there to lead the academic portion of their day and really try to build capacity in their staff so that when our staff leaves, they still have some really high educational experiences that are going on for the students who are enrolled in the Fleetwood Jourdain Community Center. So those are all of our programs. So when we talk about the demographics of our programs, as your document shows, obviously the majority of our programs serve Black and brown students, and that is at the heart of our equity work. And even when and I think it's important that we look at what kinds of programs. So we see that a majority of our Black and brown students are being served in the licensed staff academic programs. So they're getting, access to certified staff, licensed staff in the summer. But also as well in our enrichment programs. When we look at the socioeconomic status, similarly, our free and reduced lunch students are getting a large portion of our services there and in our licensed staff programming as well. So then when we look at the impact of, how well are we doing in these programs? So remember I told you that the Y Reader program is the one that kind of replaced what we used to do in our on-site programming. So our data shows that 82% of the students who participated in that program, let me say this, 82% of the students for whom we had data, and I'll explain that in a minute, maintained or grew. Now, the reason I qualify that is because in two of our schools in Washington and Lincoln, we are piloting a new early literacy assessment. So because we are piloting that, we didn't have a DRA data. They're doing the STEP system. So that's, and they are, we have many of our students who were in the program from those sites. So that's why that's a little bit qualified. I think your chart says enrolled. It describes some of the students as enrolled. That means these were students who were identified and who actually enrolled in the program. Of course, we identify lots of students, and always those students don't actually enroll, so that was just the way we identified them in that, on that chart. And then below that chart, it shows data for the home literacy program, and again, we're proud to say that 75% of the students for whom we have the data grew or maintained in their DRA scores. And finally, in our algebra program, even though there are 25 students there, of those 25 students, again, we're focusing on making sure students who needed kind of a boost as they're heading into that program, we were happy to say that 74% of them had an increase in their math score. So that's the data about the program. Any questions before we get into next year?
I just had a couple of questions for the Jumpstart program. I'm curious, the 58 that were, that participated, if you could just tell me a little bit more about how we identified those and what the cap was for that program?
So the early childhood department identifies those are children who are in our, in the JEH center. And I think we generally have 6 classrooms. So, and again, that's a kind of a dance because they identify a lot of students, but all of the parents don't always accept the invitation that they're given, so that's how they.
I'm curious, like in terms of numbers, like what our capacity is for that program.
Let's see, I would say we've served as many as I think 64 in the past. We generally have about 6 classrooms. And I have to say, those students, the profile of the students in that program, they have lots of needs. So that's one of those instances where it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily want a whole lot of kids because they come with such a complex set of needs. You want to be able to really focus attention on the students who are there and not get too many that you wouldn't be able to serve them appropriately. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was just curious in terms of if the people that need those services are making use of it. And you have a number for the number of parents that turn down the program?
No, I don't have.
No? Okay.
And it's not always turned down. Sometimes the effort that we make to really track down some families, to invite them to participate, because there is paperwork that needs to be filled out and that kind of thing, and so people are on site to do that. But I mean, really, many staff members are making a huge effort to reach out to the families, call again, you know, sometimes the numbers aren't there, you know, so it's not always that they turn down, and sometimes it's just that we just weren't able to capture them and make sure that they knew how to participate. But
No, yeah, I understand, like in terms of timing,
Right.
that time is a crunch for everybody, so.
How early so then just building on that, so let's say you've got kiddos from JEH who would qualify, right? So when does the word get out regarding the kids who qualify for these programs? Is it in March? Is it, again, is it early enough that we can engage parents as they're coming into JEH to know about these programs? And when does the word get out on some of these programs?
So they work with, these are families that they work with on a regular basis. So I don't want to speak too specifically to the details, and Sharon would be new this year, but I do know that there are families that are already enrolled in JEH. So I don't think it's necessarily finding them, it's just, again, getting them to accept. And,
I think, Sergio, kind of a way to answer that a little bit more generally is the reason we're talking about this in November is so that we can have action and approve it in December, because we organized the student recruiting process in January, and some of the initial conversations for the vast majority of those programs begin at the February conference. Because we identify students of need and reach out directly to families and work with our community partners to connect directly with families, because they really are programs that are on invitation basis.
Thank you.
So that is why we're talking about summer in November. So.
I'm sorry. So is the Jumpstart program offered to non-JEH families ever?
I don't think that we have offered it to non-JEH families.
We've had it, to date, the number of students that we feel would benefit from the program have been within JEH and at our capacity.
And met capacity, okay. And then similarly with the newcomers program, do we generally meet capacity?
Yes.
With the number of,
Yes.
okay.
We have lots of newcomers.
Yes, okay, great.
I guess it's similar to how we have information for the Y readers and the other Y program. The Jumpstart program has been around longer than that, and I'd just be curious to know what our impact and success is for that program. As you know, our community has been asking for more accountability for our early childhood programs. I think it would be helpful to know what that program has looked like throughout the years. And I know it's not in here, but
No, that's right. I'm sure Kylie and I will have a great conversation about that. Yes. Candace?
Yes, Dr. Putz. So I'm curious too, and this is just to put it out here, you know, the great partnerships that we've built with the Y and Foundation 65, and Focus, if there's been any discussion, either via, Cradle to Career or Evanston Early Childhood Network, if there's a way to leverage that Jumpstart program more broadly with either a partner commitment, a community commitment, that we might be able to reach more students, because the programs, I guess I would echo what Rebecca said, how are we showing ourselves success? And let's assume that we do believe this is a fruitful program. Might we think about it from a community-wide standpoint of how we might expand that type of offering? Because, in the overall goal of kindergarten readiness and having more of our students better prepared as they come into kindergarten, and the collaboration that we're already doing with, the early childhood community. And also identifying perhaps kids that maybe could use some additional attention during this transition. So I know that's not about this summer's budget, but just as another big idea, because when we sat and talked about 2013 about shifting, I see like this is another opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate
That's a
that.
good question.
It's a good question.
So one of the things that I noticed as I was going through the report, we serve some kids with IEPs, right? And I think it was for the Y Readers program. I know in Washington they had 0 kids with IEPs, right? And the Y Readers in Washington, and they had like maybe for Family Focus it was like 1 or 2%. Any explanation as to why the number is so low? I think sometimes, I don't know if the IEPs are developmental, but again, that might be some issue. Again, summer programs would be something that you would think is beneficial for kids who might have some type of delays.
Right.
So
We just had a meeting with the special services staff, and we talked about that very thing. We talked about really the extended school year legally is for children whose progress would regress to the point where they wouldn't recover their academic gains in a period of time. So that's really the target for extended school year services. So we really talked about, sometimes the hearts of staff members are saying, oh, this child could really benefit from the summer experience. But we really talked about saying those students could actually benefit from some of the other programs. So just because a child receives special services supports does not mean that they are not eligible for something like the Y Reader program or some of our other programs. So that we talked about that specifically.
And there are instances last year where, for instance, special ed supervisors recommended students for the Y Readers or Power Scholars program, but they just need to evaluate that, and then if ESY is required in an IEP, make necessary amendments.
Right.
And the Y program is really targeted towards students that are kind of in that 20th to 50th percentile, so we also want to make sure that the program is an appropriate academic match for students.
That kind of segues into a question I have about the difference between maybe perhaps, I'm wondering if there's a threshold or a dosage amount of access to the program that impacts the difference between those students who maintain their reading level versus those who actually grew their reading level.
We haven't looked at that.
Yeah, I can't say that I haven't gotten down to the individual student level at this point. I did notice that some of the attendance data wasn't quite as high as it has been in previous years with the Y, so the Y has been very open to collaboration and conversation and continuous improvement in the program, and so I have not yet seen the data at a student level to ask those questions, but have been looking at the data and thinking about places for us to focus and think about areas for improvement.
And we're very grateful to the community partners across the board that are part of this enterprise. And as Dr. Pitts says, it's a whole different world from 10 years ago. The Y and several of the other partners, but it was just thinking about the Y, has been really adaptable. When we've talked about focus and here's our strategies, here's our equity impact statement, here's how we want to move forward, the Y colleagues under Monique Parsons' leadership have been absolutely fantastic and been very nimble to meet the needs of our kids.
Just really quickly before you move on, so the support that we lend Freedom School, Family Focus, and Fleetwood is just in terms of resources. we don't ask for anything in return and we don't collect any sort of data.
Right, so Freedom School, we made a financial contribution, and we do facilitate to some degree, helping them get students enrolled. For Family Focus and Fleetwood, we send licensed staff to support their programming. Because of the nature of those programs, they don't use the student identification number, so we just have some logistical challenges in really trying to identify precisely who all the children are, because it's a little bit more fluid. So we did not try to collect academic data on it. And also because the amount of time, the contact time, we feel we're not really looking for that. We really wanted to respond to, in the case of Fleetwood and Family Focus, they asked us, would you send us some staff to support our programming? So really, we're letting them do their own evaluation, and they have been very positive about what our staff is bringing to their program.
Okay, so what is that support? Is it like one person once a day? Is it the same person?
Right, in the case
throughout the
of
week?
Fleetwood, there were 2 staff members who went over a period of about 5 weeks, and they would go, they have the same hours of contact as they would if they were doing on-site programming. How many hours is that? It's escaping me at the moment. 3.5 hours a day, right. So but because of how their programming is, they figure it out, so they're rotating and meeting all of the children. So for about 5 weeks, they have a half a day of contact with 2 staff members at Fleetwood.
And that's the same for Family Focus? And
Same with
Fleetwood?
Family Focus, right.
Okay.
So they rotate through a
Right.
number of groups during the
Right.
same block of time as opposed to having one group of kids over a concentrated number of hours in a
So
day.
that's a total of 6 staff that we started
Four.
sourcing?
4.
4? So does one center share? There's 3 centers and you said 2 staff.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The Freedom School does not, we don't support the staffing of Freedom School. We have supported kind of the initial lift of that program in the district, and we send staff to Fleetwood and Family Focus.
The Freedom School uses what they call servant leader interns. So they have a specific age range, and they have a whole set of an orientation that is really designed. They intentionally use a younger set of individuals to lead their experiences.
And we were part of the early startup of this, so these were as much startup funds to get them going, and wanting to be part of the community, but not going much further than that.
So for next year, we will be scaling back that support, but in general, most of our programs are the same. We're really looking to the YMCA to be our primary partner for the academic program because of the way that day is structured, because of the kind of support that it provides the family, and then we will continue to provide the other on-site academic programs that we had, as well as the enrichment programs that we provide.
Just a question about the funding for the library. What does that
Summer library learning?
provide? Yes.
So the design of the summer library learning is that teachers from the school invite not only second grade students and their families and any other individuals that they want to bring with them. And they are really kind of facilitating an introduction of those children to the library. So they come there, they meet a familiar face, and then the goal is to kind of transfer the power of the teacher to the relationship between the students and the library staff, so that they can, as I said, see the library as a destination location. So some of the things that the families have said, they didn't know about the different kinds of resources and supports that were at the library. So us being there, getting them to come to the library has just been, kind of opening a door for them.
I see. So the funding is stipends.
Correct, for teachers, yes.
For teachers' time.
Yes.
See, I appreciate some of the parent comments here, and again, if there's any components that we can ask our partners, right, and the way we do business as a district as well, in regards to including parent voice, and maybe giving them supports and giving them, tips on how to help their kid out and make that homeschool connection would be absolutely fabulous. But I do appreciate those comments that you put in, and what parents think about, the work that we do as a district along with our partners across the community.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for that presentation. There are no more questions on that. We'll move on to our Algebra for All update. So,
Yes, it does.
And David, if you would pivot the microphone towards you and get it as close as possible, you can move it. As David sets up, this is our first of ongoing snapshots of what we're doing in our algebra programming, and I think there's sort of the obvious. We have 1 year of implementation, so with 1 year of implementation, we wanted to do it deep a dive as possible, knowing that we don't have trends yet, and yet we wanted to, and David and his team have done a marvelous job of exploring what we're learning from the implementation of Algebra 1. And I think more than anything, to think about this as an in-depth snapshot, the first of many to come, and we'll look forward to your comments and questions and concerns as we go forward on this.
Yes, very much. I'm looking forward to a long-term conversation with all of you, and I've been very excited to come here tonight, my first time coming before you, but just as a bit of background, I think it's important to sort of set a stage that this very move to Algebra for All was part of an excitement that brought me to say I want to work here. Because the very fact that this board just in June of 2017 directed the district to detrack speaks to the commitment to racial equity. And when I came on just the next month, I certainly felt a sense of strong duty of stewardship. That here I was sitting in the shade of a tree I didn't plant, and all this work had been done before me to get this set up. And so this first year, I felt that sense of stewardship, right? And so I'm really excited to come to you today and present to you what I think is overall some very strong data about why this was an amazing move for kids. And I think it's also proof that the historical trends that we've seen of racial predictability are not inevitable. And I want to start with a thank you to these 27 algebra teachers. They're the reason that this happened, and I'll walk through of the things I want to do. So I'll stop along the way at some points, just making sure that things make sense as with the data, so feel free to jump into questions along the way, and then we can, of course, set time at the end as well. I want to take a moment to talk about this framework for the success. Like, how did we look at it? Just to make sure that we were having an impact, and a lot of this really is saying, okay, we had a significant change in detracking. What was the impact that, we had strong intentions, what in fact was the impact? Secondly, looking at an analysis of that in several ways you can see. And then taking a look at the math practices. I have a very short video on it so you can see in the classroom of what this looks like. Sometimes get a little bit beyond the numbers. And looking specifically at Excite and what we know about that support. And then finally, some big picture things that at least I and my team are concluding from this data, and I welcome a conversation of what other conclusions you might be seeing and some recommendations for moving ahead as we continue this conversation. So when, back in June 2017, these were some commitments that the department had made in terms of how we would monitor. So with that in mind, we also then looked at the mission statement and said, okay, we know what we want to track in terms of providing support for teachers and other lenses of how to look at achievement, but how are we honoring the full scope of the mission? And so we talked this through, so creativity, like how are we impacting that? When we talk about academically, is MAP alone enough, or what else would we want to look at? The idea of being a part of a society, a community right there in the classroom, and how does that relate to personal growth? And so we chewed on this as a team, and through the work of both administrators along with teachers and the coaches, we came up with this framework that you see, where we said, well, let's look at it in three lenses. This became a working framework for all of the algebra teachers. There were slight nuances at each school, but by and large, it was essentially the same idea. So we would look at student knowledge, saying, okay, we want all of our students to have a proficient understanding of those core ideas. And so last year we actually teased out one, linear interpretation, and said we really want to focus on that one. So teachers focused on that. Student perspective, and the perspective is two ways, right? It's perspective of oneself as a learner, as a mathematician, a sense of identity, and it's also a sense of the community, the classroom as a place of learning, looking at both pieces of that perception. And then action and language we could think of as mathematical practices, or perhaps we could just say learner practices, as a lot of the math practices coincide with science and engineering practices and ELA practices. And then so we had certain tools that we began to put in place, some of them informal, some of them more formal, but so how can we expand our lens of really seeing impact? So this starts with MAP. And I'll give you 3 different views of MAP. And let me start by just framing what you're looking at. So conditional growth scores. Why did we choose conditional growth scores? Well, we wanted to look at impact. And this would be the fairest way to look at impact because it gives a true apples to apples comparison. This is saying that we recognize a student is starting with a particular MAP score. If they're an 8th grader, we're looking at their spring 7th grade MAP score. And MAP gives us an idea of how they're expected to grow based on national norms. So students who have a, let's say 200, typically grow at this rate. And so for that particular student, how they actually grow is matched against what a student starting at 200 would expected to grow. And so if you saw a 50th percentile, that would say that students are growing as expected based on national norms. So with that in mind, you see the black line would be that 50th percentile, and immediately I would point out a couple of things. One is, let's start with, no matter we're looking at males or females, students are growing, whether they're low or high in terms of the original score, they are growing more than we'd expect based on national norms. But I would also point out you can see the distribution for males didn't change. There was no significant difference the year before Algebra for All and in this first year of Algebra for All. However, for females, there was absolutely a positive, a significant positive difference. And you might notice that there once was, the year before Algebra for All, there was a gender gap. And it is now gone. Again, if you do have questions, feel free to jump in at any point here. The second look at MAP, we said, well, let's look by race. And the story here, again, one of the trends that we saw in the data was that in no case did we harm any students, right? I think one of the concerns that I would say I heard just going into this was, well, are we going to water down the course? What's going to happen? And we found out that no, that didn't happen, no matter how we looked at it. So if we look here by race, with every racial subgroup, there was no significant difference in how students grew, with one exception, that was black students, and that we had a positive impact on black students. Again, if we look at the orange, and if you look specifically at the subgroup just of black students, you can see that positive difference where the mean is much higher than it was the year before implementation. But if you look at the Asian on the left, white on the right, the means are still higher. So there's clearly work ahead of us, but there's been a strong step forward based on the year before implementation and then the first year of implementation.
So looking at the multiracial category, what does it mean? I mean, my interpretation of that is that there are less people that are below the 50th, but there are also less people that are, I don't know what, 80 and 90 up there. Is that, can you explain?
Yeah, so for the let's see if my laser works here. Let's see if no, maybe not. For the multiracial, there's two bits of information about averages in there. So one is the horizontal bar in the middle, and the other is the X. So the horizontal bar is the median, so that'd be the 50th, so that'd be the median, the actual middle score, where the X is the mean, And so if you notice, in most cases, the X isn't too far from the horizontal. In most cases, it's not too far. But in the case of multiracial, what happened was the mean didn't really shift too much. The X's are about the same, but that median dropped a lot. And I didn't dig deep enough to understand why that's going on. What I can say is that our Department for Research and Accountability said there was no significant difference in the distributions, but I did find it curious that the median dropped. So sometimes that can happen just to an odd distribution, like if the distribution is going out to the left, or if the end's kind of small, which could be the case, that can happen too.
So, but just generally, just using that as an example, just so I understand, what does it mean if the block, whatever, the rectangle got shorter, right? Like, in that case, the rectangle block got shorter, it seems like it means it's more, there's less variability on...
That's exactly what it means.
Correct?
That's exactly what it means, yes.
Okay, so the shorter variability on that group of, across their growth.
That's right.
But it looks like the median, you're saying that the X is the median?
Yeah, it's correct. The median from the blue to the orange dropped in the case of, and again, it could be just because of a low end.
Okay.
But yes, the variability shrunk. And variability also with lower ends can change, the variability can vary, right?
David, on the Latinx, was the conclusion that that wasn't significant?
Excuse me?
On the Latinx, was the...
we don't think so. I mean, it looks nice. It looks like it went up, but statistically...
It's not statistically significant.
No.
Right.
So, just to understand what we're looking at right now, this is measuring the impact. So in 2017, based on what we saw when we evaluated this program, that a very small percentage of Black and brown students were in honors algebra. And now all students in 2018 are in honors algebra. So this is the impact of moving everyone into honors algebra.
That's correct.
And how much higher they're scoring in their algebra aptitude and math test.
That's correct.
Well, it's not just algebra aptitude, it's overall. Is this a RIT? Is this related to?
This is, sorry, to be clear, this is the overall RIT, so it's not looking just at the sub-score.
Is there a just since you brought it up, did you look at sub-scores separately, or just
We did not. I love digging into data. It can be a bit of a rabbit hole. If we think it's worthwhile looking, we certainly could. Yeah. We did not.
But there is something sub-score around algebra, isn't there? Right, like something.
Yes, it's the same sub-score we use for acceleration placement, operations and algebraic thinking. So we could. The third look we had at MAP was by the beginning MAP score. So depending on what grade level the student was, let's assume most of these students are 8th graders, that we would look at their score in the spring of 7th grade and ask ourselves, is this student scoring in the bottom quartile, the second quartile, third or fourth? And then based on that, what was their growth? Again, the conditional growth, just to make sure that we're clear about this, the conditional growth is based on national norms for students who are starting at that level, right? So this is, the fact that we're seeing like a staircase is that it shouldn't be that way. If we were growing students just what's typical on national norms, you would see just a horizontal band, right? It would be no staircase. So we can't say, oh, students in the lower quartile just grow less. That's already been accounted for in creating conditional growth. So clearly, we're not doing as well by the students in the lower quartiles. However, in both for students in the first and second quartile, we did see significant positive changes. And I would point out, in the third and the fourth quartiles, there was no change, no negative change. It's virtually the same as it was before. Again, going to the story of, we didn't water anything down. There was no children harmed in this, right? The rising tide truly was raising all boats. Again, there's some work to be done, as you can see, but the orange is a little more of a horizontal band than the blue was, less of a staircase than before. So those are MAP scores. So we said, well, let's look at impact in different ways. Well, this one is outstanding. Just by design, what we now have is just to your point that you made, Lindsay, is that every single student is now taking Algebra 1, not Algebra 8. So that's accomplished. That happened by the way that we set up the course. However, another look at demographics shows another trend that I think is worth just noticing. And so I'll start on the left. The left is asking, what is the percent of 8th graders who are taking geometry or higher? So in other words, what's the percent of students who accelerated? And you can see, I made a little highlight for Asian and white students, you know, a quarter, maybe slightly more than a quarter for white students are accelerating, are taking algebra before 8th grade. And then you can compare that to Black and Hispanic students, the percentage is far lower. Well, the impact then, and impact of that, if we go to the right side of this screen, is the sectioning of algebra. So it's true that everyone now who's taking algebra is taking the same algebra course, Algebra 1, formerly honors algebra. However, the sections themselves are typically done in one of two ways, and it's mostly split down the middle, even across schools. So in some cases, about half the time, the section is all 8th graders, and the other half of the time, roughly, it's mixed, so mostly 7th and 8th graders combined. And so, because of what you see on the left side of the screen, there's an effect on the right side of the screen that even within the same school, some sections of algebra are whiter than other sections. Now, you can see the difference. We're talking about 51% versus 46%. It is significantly different. That's not by chance. Another lens we took was looking at student perspective. We did this in a few ways. The most formal way was via the 5 essentials. I would just caution here, a grain of salt. When we looked at the 5 essentials, there's only certain ways we can cut the data. The one that seemed most closely paired with algebra was to look at 8th graders, but we know that not all 8th graders, we just saw that right in the previous slide, not all 8th graders are taking algebra. So it's not exactly a measurement of algebra. And I also would say where you see the approximation of the numbers, those are approximates over the district. It was difficult for us to get an exact score district-wide, but I looked at sort of an average across schools to give a sense. So what did we see? Well, supportive environment, looked at with 2 lenses, so student-teacher trust and academic personalism. You can see here on the screen how those things are determined. Those are the statements that are given to the students for them to respond to. And, you know, we saw mixed results. We saw that the student-teacher trust rose. It's still not high at 35 out of 100, but it did significantly rise across the district. Academic personalism is somewhat in the middle and took a bit of a fall. I wouldn't say a steep fall from before, but it did fall. The other way is looking at ambitious instruction, and in both measures of that, we saw a decline, mostly of academic press. So that, of the 4 categories, I think had the strongest negative numbers in terms of comparison to the year before. And the math instruction, whereas no one would see anything drop, I honestly had nowhere to go but down. I mean, we had straight 99s across the board. So the math instruction was just bar none. And I'm not too concerned about that. I wouldn't want to see a trend, but, you know, I think I'm be more concerned with what we're seeing on the left. Which, please tell me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, that may or may not be about math in particular. I think they choose a course where the one on the right certainly is math. So we also looked just more informally. The teachers would check in with the students in different ways, sometimes very informally via circles, just to have a conversation, but they would stop and have surveys on occasion. And so a couple of teachers said, sure, you can. Yeah, this is what the students said. So here you can see some things that students said. I think in terms of what the things they liked, they really enjoyed being a part of a group. The satisfaction of learning, which I think is great to see when we're talking about mindset and perseverance and all these practices. The idea of everything coming together and just seeing the progress, and again, that's great when we think in terms of perception and the sense of identity that, yes, look what I've done. I mean, I think that's huge and great to see students recognizing that in themselves. And then, of course, just, you know, a number of students said they really love solving equations, so that came up a bit. In terms of recommendations, again, this is not exhaustive, but just to give you an example of types of things that would come up from the students. They liked learning as a group, and they want to do it even more. I thought that was interesting. The idea of just having hands-on, I think they wanted to be relevant physical models. I thought that was really interesting. Students were calling out for that because we know that's an extremely effective way to bridge students from concrete to abstract. And then this idea, they didn't use the word differentiation, but you can see it in the lower right, the second to last bullet. That's essentially what they're saying. It's like, I'm recognizing different kids have different needs, and how do we get at that is really what they were, at least a few students were saying. And a number of students said, I got no suggestions. This was a great year. Teacher feedback is really, you'll see, quite parallel to what students are saying. And so 3 big areas of success that teachers essentially were saying is that students seeing themselves, that sense of identity, seeing themselves as learners, and they were really happy to see that impact on their kids. The fact that we're not tracking is generally something I think teachers are very proud of, and now that we have data to show its impact, I think I'm even more excited myself. And just the fact that that third bullet on the left, that again, nothing was watered down. We maintained the rigor. And it was only helpful. No one fell as a result of this. And then again, you see that differentiation. So a recurring theme there. Is there a way for me to, oh my goodness. Is this off of a PDF probably? I have an amazing video, but I don't think it's going to play off of here. Or maybe I could send it to you. Okay, it's about a 70-second video, and what you'll see is a look at a classroom, because I think, we can look at a lot of charts and a lot of numbers and a lot of quotes, but when you look at that video, if you I want to see it a little bit, notice how many teachers there are in that classroom. And I think the power of the student voice, and the more teachers are in a classroom, the more learning is going on. So just notice that when you see the video. I will email it to you. Okay, so now we're going to look at Algebra Excite. Specifically, there's a lot of words up there, but if you look at the bigger bullets, one thing I'd point out again is that what teachers are noticing and what students are noticing are in parallel. It's not like we have completely different stories going on, right? So teachers are saying, you know what, sorry, let me back up a second. The upper right, our Department for Research and Accountability looked at measures in 3 different ways. They looked at the growth percentile, which we saw on the charts before. They looked at the conditional growth index, which is really just another measure of the same phenomenon. And then the third one was looking at GPA. And what they did is they looked at the specific cohort that was in Algebra Excite last year as 8th graders and rewinded with that same cohort. Well, how did they do in 6th grade? How did they do in 7th grade? How did they do in 8th grade? And what you can see in that table in the upper right is that no matter what metric you're using, they did better. Okay, so then to the bottom part of the slide. So the sense of perception and identity, that teachers and students both saw similar things, the sense of community and confidence and self-advocacy, that the success was genuine. And the students felt that when you saw those comments before, like, oh, it's just coming together, look at how much we did this year. And then on the right side, you see similar comments that it made me want to try hard. That really stuck out to me, right? The sense of identity and how that translates into greater effort. And then a simple quote of like, last year I didn't do that well, and this year I did. The power of a comment like that. And then the opportunity for support, that the Excite class itself was just this newfound place to like, okay, my teachers got my back. The other students in there, they got my back, we're a community. And one of the questions that was coming up, you can see, is, wow, this seems to transcend math. What should these supports look like? What's really effective, and to what extent might this help outside of math? And it's just a question that some teachers and students have had. So areas for growth with Excite. There were some questions around the selection criteria. I would say more questions than answers at this point, but do we have the right criteria for selecting when a student should come into Excite when they need that support? And would it make sense to have an exit criteria? I think the data suggests that whatever we're doing is effective, so that's good news, but that question still remains. The second one, the ability I just mentioned before, like the idea of how much should this go beyond math? And just, again, no clear answers, but it's something that people are discussing.
David, what is the, I'm sorry, I don't recall, what is the select, how are students?
So there was some variability between the schools. I think it was like generally a 35th percentile, I want to say, 40th percentile, depending on the school.
So the minimum criteria was 25th percentile, but in some cases, they did push that criteria higher. In one particular school, they pushed it closer to the 50th. Principals did reach out over the summer to families and say, we're recommending that your child goes into this, it takes advantage of this opportunity for these reasons. It did remove kids from a foreign language, so families made an option as to whether they would participate in the course or not.
Double.
It was an additional period, but the course really designs in executive functioning skills, some opportunity for social emotional learning, as well as ways to approach the math in different ways. So when David talks about building a community, moving to a growth mindset, there's a lot of elements I think one of the key differences that teachers pushed us on the design of this is it wasn't just more of the same math class. It was designed to be very intentionally different in order to support areas where they felt they had seen students traditionally also present struggles that they felt would help them be better successful in the math class. So how do we help them with executive functioning? How do they help them with their growth mindset around math? And then how do we expose them to key skills in advance in a different way that allows them to be able to pick up the learning, more quickly?
Was it a 3-period block?
It got implemented differently in places. They had their double period of algebra and they had an additional algebraic site in some cases. In most cases, I don't believe it was the adjacent period, right. But in some situations, it was the same teacher, but not universally was it the same teacher.
So last 2 slides here. One, conclusions. Again, a lot of words, so I'll just kind of go over the big bullets there. And then finally, the road ahead. So conclusions. So I saw 3 main things that I would highlight, and again, open up for other conclusions that you might be seeing. But in terms of enrollment, in terms of academics, and in terms of practices and perception. So in terms of enrollment, the primary objective was achieved as soon as we scheduled the kids, and that was a great step, a great technical step. However, if you look on the right side, there are still some elements of racial predictability even within the course between sections in the same school that I pointed out. Slight, nowhere like it used to be, but it is still there. In terms of academics, the success is that, again, there was no dip in academic success, that the rigor was in fact maintained, and in fact we saw an increase in academic performance, a strong impact amongst black students, amongst female students, and amongst students in the first and second quartiles. However, in terms of areas of concern, the student perception of the teacher's academic expectations that we saw in the 5 essentials, that's something we want to explore some more to better understand that. And then finally, practices and perceptions. Students generally suggest that they're strong. I think I would suggest we want to take a closer look at them and perhaps have some slightly more formal or at least more systemic ways to bring student perspective into the fold, given that the initial slide I showed with the 3 pillars of how we're looking at success. But from what we have, there's a lot of good news. So looking ahead, you do have your own copy, right? So I know it's hard to read. The measurement, so 4 big areas that I would tease out, right? And this is a lot of work. I think being realistic about what we can actually commit to is a conversation to have, and so you can see right at the top, like we would like to be able to collaborate with the teachers, with the coaches, with the building administration to select from this and see what makes the most sense for us to focus on. But the first big bucket, the measurement and monitoring. So as I've been suggesting throughout this presentation, how can we expand our evidence of impact beyond simply what MAP can measure? I'm very excited about what MAP has shown us. I also know there's so much more that we want to see happen for our kids that MAP can't capture. So we want to know how to, we want to get better at that, which is very similar to the next bullet of just knowing the district's mission. How might we be able over time to build some tools that can capture our impact on all areas of our mission. And then, just the idea of surveys, just wondering about that. We've had some informal use of them. There's pros and cons for making that more formal, but we'd like to sort of investigate how we can get student perspective in the fold more. The second large bullet, the student perception, which I mentioned on the last slide. Why did we see some drops there already? Just to give you an idea of one of the 27 algebra teachers, I showed her, when I showed her the slide, she said, I need to ask my kids these questions. What are questions they ask in the essential survey? So I said, well, here they are. And that same day, she created a Google form, she gave it to her kids, they filled it out, and they talked about it. And I think it's exactly that sort of mindset that will lead to those perceptions improving. And in fact, in her classroom, kids they scored really high on a lot of that. And they had a great conversation. It gave her a couple ideas. Oh, that's something I could do. So doing more of that just to better understand what's really going on there. The third big bullet, that idea of the racial predictability of enrollment that still exists, probing more into the whys behind that and what we might be able to do in regards to that. And then finally, really about continuing practice that we have, and as we continue them, how might we even strengthen them? So particularly the differentiated support that you saw coming up both from a teacher lens and from a student lens is something that we need to do even more of. Continuing to have these conversations about impact. This is a great first year. What's the second year look like? What's the third year look like? And then continuing to coordinate with District 202 in terms of a few layers, but understanding impacts in placement in freshman year. And I think that's rolled up with understanding when we talk about algebra, what exactly are we talking about? So we're hitting the right skills to prepare students when they go on to geometry and algebra 2 in high school.
And just as you end, I want to also underscore where you started, which was the 27 teachers, along with the coaches and the administrators in the buildings. This is a really fascinating opportunity to really work together as a collaborative team across multiple levels of the system to execute and implement, and to be really curious about how well we're doing and how can we actually do better. So I just want to congratulate you and the team for being that engaged.
Well, it started with this board, with directing everyone, and it was an honor to come to the district with this charge.
Thank you for the presentation. We can open it up to the board for questions.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Matt. I was thinking I might go see one of my kids in a choral concert, but I stayed because it's so interesting.
I'm sorry.
So I'll have her talk to you. So I really appreciate the way this presentation put together, all the work, and it's really illuminating, I think, on a number of fronts. I have a couple of quick questions, just additional questions about the data, and then just some other observations. But so my first question, because the chart that you showed, or the graph you showed on the quartiles, if you could go back to that, was really wow. In terms of the impact in the lower quartiles, and I was also very surprised, quite frankly, that the fourth quartile was that high, because intuitively, as we've talked in the past, it's been around at the top end of the quartiles. The growth tends to go down because there's not as much room for growth, and so it seems counterintuitive to me. And I guess so. What I'm wondering is partially, is that group, that fourth quartile, is that everybody in 8th grade, or is that those taking algebra? Because a significant portion of that group is probably not taking algebra in 8th grade.
So
taking geometry.
These, when the Research and Accountability Department did this work, these 3 slides are algebra only. So they might be 7th graders, they might be 8th graders. They are not 8th graders taking geometry.
Got it. Okay. So it would be any 8th graders. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I think it's very illuminating, clearly, on where we need to continue to work.
Yeah.
Why is, it's counter to what kind of I was thought before. The other question I had was more about in terms of data is a request. And it kind of relates to your slide about the ongoing racial predictability of those who are accelerated. I know I've asked this before, but having placement data for the high school is really, really important, because as I talk, I have an 11th grader now, I have a 10th grader. As I talk to kids, and I believe it was even in the joint board meeting last year, not the one last week, where there were kids there who, one of whom was a young woman of color, and was talking about the lack of diversity in Chem Phys and the advanced AP math classes. And that's something that the high school, I don't see how they can fix. Like, that starts with us, right? And because really kids do need to be accelerated, they can do it without, but the majority of kids who take the Chem Phys track, who take BC Calc, MB, any of those classes, had to have been accelerated. You don't have to be accelerated to be in Chem Phys, but from what I understand from the kids who go through it, it's really difficult to have those concepts concurrently when you're starting your first year in 10th grade of Chem Phys. And we've made so many advancements in AP and many other subjects, and I don't know what the breakdown is at the high school, but my sense is from those students and from my own students looking at, is that we have not yet broken through. And so I went onto the high school's website today about math placement, because I was really, honestly, the other question, I was really trying to understand, like, how do they place kids in 9th grade math? Separate question, but it says on the site, basically, that if you're on the if you're interested in any STEM fields, you need to start with geometry. You need to be in geometry in 9th grade. And so that's why I asked for the placement data, because, do we have the same, hopefully we have better results in terms of kids taking Algebra 1 again. And I think that is really important as we look to, kind of end the racial predictability in those more advanced classes and help kids have more access to those classes. So
I have a call into Dale Leap for it to be able to get that data. I do want to caution, and in the memo, I address this, is that I think I would agree it's really important to look at, absolutely. I also want to caution of what the significance of it. And the reason I say that is the current 9th graders were the first to have a new cutoff score. So it went from a 220 to a 230, and the high school decided that. That has nothing to do with us. And so I'm confident you will see more students taking algebra. And we need to know that's not about a change that we made. So, if we just looked at a high level and said, well, the first year we did algebra for all of a sudden we've got fewer kids being able to take geometry freshman year. Well, that's because there was a change in a cutoff score. And so I will get that information, but we really need to have a huge grain of salt when we look at that. And the coordination with the high school, I think, involves a better understanding of how to best place students.
it also begs the question of why was that cutoff change?
Yes, absolutely.
And is it based on preparedness, or, those are the important collaboration discussions that we should be having, because we all have the same goal in mind, I believe, right? But on the face of it, that says to me they're reducing opportunity. But I'm sure there's a better answer for that, right? So I get why then the data could say a different message. I just think, generally speaking, that data is still very important, because what we've done here, we have to realize that the overall effect is to create more opportunity later at the high school, in addition to having more balanced and mixed classes in 8th grade. There is a separate and equally important, in my mind, goal of access later.
I will coordinate with the high school and get the information.
Thank you. And again, thank you for this. I mean, I think the Excite information is really, it's all really good, but that was especially interesting to me to see the positive there, and it was also good to see the anecdotal data. I was surprised that only 24% of kids said I like math, but I think that would be something that would be great for us to be tracking as kids go throughout our system. Are we
are we losing kids, or when are we encouraging them? Does that grow over time? But so at least it's sparked, like this, these are the kinds of questions we should be asking. So that's.
Yeah, but that's only from the group of students that took the essential 5.
No, the I Like Math.
The 5
is a
is
sub-
Yeah,
class.
and even that was, it wasn't all students, that was, a teacher, and I think a teacher in that case said, here, you can use some data here. So it is a small sample size, but it's meant to give a flavor for what kids were saying.
Yeah, and I just think that student voice is extremely important when it comes to this and getting feedback. If there is a way to, you've already talked a little bit about this, but if there's a way to get everyone's voice, all of our students, and I think really helping students be their own advocates. One of the things that I did at my parent-teacher conference is I had teachers talk to my student about these scores, and I think a lot of the data is towards parents, and parents don't often have the skills to explain what a student needs to do to get to, to a certain score. And I think if there's any way that we can incorporate how we deliver this information to students, I think that would be really exciting to give students that ability to be their own advocate and to really see their position and how they can get themselves to the next level. So that's, I think it's a great day to be a girl. That data is really encouraging, and I think it's just giving girls the opportunity to be in those classes. So that totally made my day. But again, I think if we're able to give students a voice and really help them be advocates for their own, for their own success, is I think something that we could take away from this.
Thank you.
And more interactive stuff, like I think any kid will tell you in math, like anything that's hands-on, interactive, group, group work. I think that our kids totally eat that stuff up, and I'm sad we couldn't see the video. I'm sure some of that was included in the video you would present.
Yeah, in that case, it was all around computers, it was interactive what they were doing for sure, between themselves and with the program.
Yeah, project-based learning. I think that we've seen that success in other areas. I can't imagine that it wouldn't be successful in algebra.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And just to build off of the parent-teacher reference that you made, and looking at the Latinx score and how there was, again, just a slight movement. I mean, it's some improvement. It's very critical for me to think about, parents who, again, are limited English proficient, right? And they go to the parent-teacher conferences, and, a lot of times, there are translators there, but there's times where there's like 1 or 2 and there's just not enough. And it really is really helpful to parents, right? I know when I get emails from my kiddo's math teacher, either my wife or I get on our kid, like, oh, well, you got this coming up. The beautiful thing that I'm seeing is that, again, I'm starting to see stuff done in Spanish and in English, right? And we want to make sure that anytime our parents come in contact, and particularly for Latinx parents, that we have those translation services so parents understand the data and it understands what impact it has on their kids and how they can try to help their kiddos out at home, right? So that I think is something that we really need to make sure that we do in order to increase those, make it a statistical difference in regards to kids succeeding. I really appreciate, again, moving from just, again, so it's a new day. I think in this district, again, having detracked algebra, and now going beyond just the MAP scores, to talk about student voice, to talk about teachers, and talk about how as a community we're collaborating in this district to move children forward. And I would love to see, for this to be the format that we hear as a board and as a community, how we move kids forward. Because again, it's been a long time coming, and I think about last week's joint 202 and 65 meeting where we had our colleagues from our Northwestern presenting on the NERO project, and again looking at all these different ways to measure access to opportunity, right? Because that is the conversation now. The data has told us for so long that there's been a gap. This is going to the way we're talking about student success right now. is just an incredible way to move forward on how we look at all the different aspects that impact children and move them from being beyond just data points into being these whole human beings that exist within a family, within a community, within a school. So I'm very excited to see this. So and this is just the first year. This is just the first year. So again, I'm definitely interested too. Also, again, making sure that we collaborate with 202. I said it last week at the joint meeting, is that we have to. For me, transitions, particularly for marginalized students, are really tough, and particularly for students who are have families who are limited English proficient. Moving from pre-K to K, that's a tough transition. Moving from second to third is tough. I taught second and third, I know it. And moving from the middle school to the high school, really kind of digging into that. So this way that we're talking about kids, it's very exciting to me, and I'm very, very happy and proud that we're all working together, and we've made this decision to, again, try to close the access opportunities to access, or the gap to opportunity, right? So thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, actually. Sorry, I'm just full on hog this microphone for a minute. Sorry. I agree with everyone. This has been really interesting, and I applaud the work that's being done. What we did with algebra, the district did with algebra, was really two things, right? One is to give everyone the opportunity to take honors algebra, and the second thing was to introduce the Algebra Excite program. I'm wondering, of the advancements and the gains seen, how much of the gain is attributable to Algebra Excite versus offering everyone the opportunity to take what was formerly known as honors algebra, but really it's still the same course because it wasn't watered down at all previously.
I would be guessing, to be honest. I mean, it's hard to nail that down in terms of data. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both. I don't think I could point to one or the other.
The reason I'm asking is because it seems like Algebra Excite worked.
Yeah.
Definitively.
Yeah.
Right? How do we create Algebra Excite for kindergartners and first graders so that we don't have to have algebra, we don't have to have students wait until 8th grade to get these supports that are incredibly useful?
So just to make sure I'm understanding. So at first I thought what you're asking about was it because we put everyone in the same course, or was it because we gave Algebra Excite?
The data that was presented made it look like MAP scores went up for students taking algebra, and that the only difference between 27 and 2018 was that students were all in Algebra 1 versus Algebra 8.
So I mean, I think that what I would suggest is, and thinking, I would say this, what I'm about to say would be the same thing, I think, for kindergarten, is if we provide the same set of high standards for all students and give the support for all students to meet them, those are the reasons behind the data you're seeing. So that was essentially the model of Algebra for All, and I do think it could be carried into any grade level.
So is there a plan to introduce an Excite type program to earlier grades so that students don't have to wait until 8th grade?
No, not as it stands like here, but the mentality behind it is present. The idea of what does it look like to give support. So there's constant conversations going on across grade levels. This particular year, the coaches who were working in in algebra shifted to 6th grade, because we all know the data in 6th grade. So we're moving our efforts there. So we're looking at 6th grade. What does support look like? Even if they don't have Excite, how do we provide the differentiation within the 2-period block? And within a first grade teacher's day or a kindergarten, whatever it is, we're looking strongly at the primary grades, K through 2, to ask ourselves, based on the data we're having in our as we use this new assessment framework, how can we in fact take action on that? I think we're making stronger efforts and gains this year than in prior years in really beginning to use the assessment information to create plans for kids and give those interventions that they need.
Got it. I think just, and a couple follow-up pieces. Excite was 93 kids, and we had somewhere around 750, I think, in algebra this year. And so we know, too, I would say that David's answer on both and is important. We know that the work that the teachers did in the algebra class and some of the ongoing press and rigor was really important. And then I think a piece of what is, because we can see really nice growth in that second quartile as well, and Excite was really modeled much more towards first quartile students. I think a couple important lessons, one, we found something, with Algebra Excite, we have something that had a very positive impact on a subset of kids. Some of the ingredients that went into that were very explicitly taking a look at the needs that were being presented by students, listening to teachers who said, some of the patterns that we see for these students are, and therefore we have ideas about how we want to address this. And so one of the things I hesitate when I think about this is, this support class was intentionally designed differently than other support classes. And so I think as we look at support in younger grades, we really need to think about what's the environment, what are the needs that are presented, and what are the voices saying as the best possible ways to support ongoing acceleration. So I think we lift those ideas, and that is some of the work that we're doing around multi-tiered systems of supports, some of the early intervention work that we're doing, an additional literacy program that actually was supported partially by Foundation 65 as kindergarten literacy partners. We have, so there's work there, but I think what we lift out of that is not necessarily the package of Excite, but what were the elements that went into design and diagnosis to come up with something that works well.
So I also think there's a narrative here about differentiation. You saw it in the students saying, hey, we need that, and the teachers saying we want some more help. And it's differentiation based on a high standards the type of offering, as opposed to differentiating at different levels.
Sure.
It's saying that all kids deserve the highest level access to be challenged.
Yeah.
And we're gonna help kids along the way in that regard.
I think that makes sense. So King Arts, that was a school that was part of the pilot program, right? So in 2017, they also only had one level of algebra that was offered to all students, correct? So you can actually see that's a really great indication of like holding constant what Excite was able to do for an entire school. I mean, that's really exciting. So I think I'm very excited about that. I think that's really great.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that extended to be able to see the fruits of everyone's labors continually. The other question I have is, as far as next steps and recommendations is concerned, and Dr. Gordon, you just touched on this, is what are the supports going to be provided to teachers to help with the individualized learning, since the teachers and students both requested those supports?
The strongest thread of conversation we're having is around the use of formative assessments. I think that's a huge lever. The more that we can learn how to think in terms of standards to be met rather than what to do, the script says do this day, this day, this day, this day, using that as a basis, but then using our formative assessment to understand where students are, and that can lead to flexible grouping. In fact, in the video you'll see is an example of where students are self-regulating. So when, like, John Hattie's work is showing, like, what are the things that have the most impact, and right up there towards the top is this idea of self-directed learning, and so you'll see that in the video. So what's happening essentially there is use of formative assessment, where students are understanding, oh, I understand this, and here's how I know, I'm going to move on to the next thing. And so I think the more that we're trying to have conversations around that focus on standards, and rather than a script, let's call it, and how it is that we can not only use formative assessment from a teacher lens, but also empower students to see where they are in their own learning and make good choices. I think that begins to build, when we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy, the idea of creating independent learners, and this is really, I think, an engine for doing that, really truly creating a lifelong learner who has this high level ability to recognize where I am in terms of what I know and what I don't know, and given that, what can I do next? So those are the types of conversations we're having that I would call, when I say formative assessment, I'm kind of referring to all of that.
Okay. And then one last thing, sorry. And I know everyone else has already touched on this, but I want to push a little bit harder on the 202 integration. Okay. I'm struggling to understand what the roadblock is to getting that information. And it just seems to me to be incredibly important. Because, like, Candace had said, once they get to 9th grade, we have no control at all anymore. And even the fact that they changed the criteria and we don't have any information on that is troubling to me. Can you help me understand what the roadblock is and
So
what the plan
I
is? to
wouldn't say it's a roadblock. I actually, when I put together the memo, and I'll own it, I was trying to measure the impact, and what I would offer is it's not necessarily a measurement.
Or this is not, you were not the first person to say that there wasn't access to data to the 202, or it wasn't working, like, this is.
So I hear the question, and let me see if I can get the data. I suspect I should be able to share it soon. If I run into problems, then I'll come back and answer why I think there's a roadblock. But at this point, I don't see one.
I think it might just be in terms of information, and that might fall on our colleagues at 202 in helping us understand like what we can do to ensure that we're getting our students ready. You know, I think this started as a conversation at our last meeting. I think that there isn't a sense of like what I can do as a parent to ensure that when my kid is ready for, or is going to move on to high school, that they're able to make access, to make use of all that's offered to them. And again, the teachers knew that, right? So the teachers knew like exactly what my daughter needed to do, how many points away she was in order to be considered for a class. And so as we're talking about like how we empower not only our students, but our parents to know, and this information that you shared with us about the change in score is news to me, and I'm just curious, and that doesn't fall on you. I think it just falls on better communication from our colleagues at 202, and hopefully maybe they're listening.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I was really pleased reading the memo, especially the Algebra Excite information. When we originally talked about the proposal, I felt pretty strongly that it was a proposal to put educational equity into action, and this data confirms that. And one of the things that I guess I want to highlight is the fact that when we were originally started talking about how to address our equity needs in 2016 and 2017, part of that conversation, I believe, was recognizing that our institution is a learning institution and that the adults and the institution itself should be able to learn, which means that we don't get every step that we take is not the right step, that we have the opportunity to try things out and to learn from them and course correct. And so what I appreciate about investing in the original proposal and seeing this, the results, is that what we invested in was our belief in children's aptitude, and that we indicated to our children that we believe you deserve the highest standard of curriculum and instruction, the highest standard of rigor, and we will meet our institutional obligation to give you the supports that you need to access that. And it was, I was touched in seeing the students change in their own perception of themselves. And I think that that's a really important metric for us to consider, that, when we talk about not just looking at academic outcomes, but we're also looking at social emotional outcomes and seeing children as whole people. The way that we talk about students' aptitude and the gap in opportunity to achieve gets internalized. And it's really important that we provide those opportunities to say you are more than this one number, you're more than this larger statistic. You are an individual who is absolutely capable of greatness, and we will invest in that. We believe in that. We're going to challenge you to reach your highest potential, and we're going to support you in doing that. I was really happy to see our institution do that learning, and I think that and I'm appreciating also hearing about how we can apply that elsewhere. You know, part of what I think can be the effect of constantly talking about the gap in opportunity to achieve as an achievement gap is that folks may have lower expectations, right? And I think exposure to solutions such as what we're put into this proposal and the outcomes that we see is one way to say, no, keep those expectations high, and here's a method of doing that. And I guess that's an investment in how we support children, but also how we support educators in listening to them and providing them coaching, providing them materials. And I appreciate that there is thought being put into how do we continue to do that in other places. And one of the things that I was wondering when I looked at the data and the predictability of 7th grade placement in algebra was that always there? That predictability in terms of 7th grade placement? And do we have our eye on taking the lessons that we learned here with 8th grade algebra and applying that to 7th grade, access to algebra in 7th grade?
The answer is yes.
I really appreciate what you said, and if I combine it with what Candace said earlier, it's a really important point, which is, as a learning organization, this sort of preliminary snapshot study is really important, so our 27 educators and David and Stacy and team can move forward, so Kylie can be thinking about how we do our data as we move forward. But it's also, we have a narrative here, and it's only a first year. And so I want to be excited, but I also want to make sure that we're really on edge to watch where children who are in quartile 1 and quartile 2 seemingly are going up, and children in quartile 3 and quartile 4 are maintaining and not going down. And so that's a big narrative to say that we can do this work, we can change mindsets for all of our kids and not water down and not have not live up to the watering down of a class. But it's a first year. And so it gives me a lot of excitement, and on behalf of the team, to say, let's stay on our toes, let's keep learning, let's see what we can do to even make this better as we go forward.
Yeah, I want to echo my colleagues' appreciation for the format of this report. I loved seeing the data, the quote unquote hard data in terms of the scores, but also then the quote unquote soft data in terms of the feedback from students and from teachers, which I think was really important, because I know part of the concern that some community members put forward was that teachers wouldn't be able to differentiate sufficiently, especially at a larger school like Haven with the wider variety of learners. And we had teachers in this room telling us, no, they could do it, and the data is showing us. And their feedback is showing us that, yes, they could do this and maintain the rigor and pace of the course. So I think I really appreciated having all three aspects of analysis of the program here. And like Sergio said, I would love to see this kind of be a model of how we look at achievement data in all aspects, not just with this algebra program. So thank you very much for that. I think one thing that I would add in thinking about the acceleration data and kids who are taking algebra in 7th grade and then geometry in 8th grade is looking at the if there's any racial predictability in that 6th, 7th grade compacted course that we created a few years ago. I know in part the theory around that is that we would actually because it wasn't full skipping a year, but creating that compacted course that would actually give greater access to students to accelerate, to get to those higher levels of math earlier. It seems like maybe that hasn't necessarily been the case, but I don't know. I'm not sure that we've ever seen data around what's been happening with that compacted course, so that might be something that would be helpful for us to look at in analyzing further around that. And then I also echo the questions around the geometry placement. I know when we looked at the data in 2017, we did have general data that showed that a majority of our students were placing into geometry or higher in 9th grade. I understand that the cut scores have changed, and it would be helpful to understand why, from the high school's perspective, why that's changed. But even if we could get a sense of how many students who took Algebra for All last year were placed into geometry, and how many would have been placed into geometry under the previous cut score. So we at least have some idea of the impact under the previous scores, but then understanding that we have to know what's going on at the high school and what created that change could be helpful. So if we can get that.
Sure, absolutely.
I think that would be immensely helpful. So I don't really have a whole lot to add. I think this is, I am cautiously optimistic, just like Dr. Gorin said. I think this is all really exciting. It's showing that it was having the impact that we were hoping it would have, and I look forward to continuing to see data like this. Are there any other questions or comments?
I want to thank David. I'm glad that we were able to attract talent based on our focus.
I very much meant what I said about being in the shade of a tree I didn't plant. It is so much an honor to join this community. I've been here as a community member now for 15 years, and to be able to combine my professional role with my personal role, and to join a commitment to this work. Like I said, this decision to do this was made when I was interviewing, and trust me, I'm like, a board that wants to do that, I'm in. And so I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate the 27 teachers who made this happen, and the administrative work at each of the buildings. It's a great environment to be in.
Now you've got to put math and literacy in District 65. The family.
That's right.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
With that, with no further business to come before the board, this meeting is adjourned at 8:28 p.m. Thank you, everyone.